A day of secrets and storms. The wedding that shook Port Charles ***. The sun had barely risen over Port Charles before the day began to unravel into chaos. On the surface, it was meant to be a joyous celebration, a new beginning for Drew and Willow, two people who had endured so much loss and pain only to find peace and hope in one another. Their wedding, held at the Quartermain estate, was poised to be a tender, serene occasion. The floral arrangements were elegant, the guest list intimate, and Lucy Coe had outdone herself with custom invitations that shimmered with promise. But beneath the silver script and soft violins, a storm had been brewing, one that would rip through friendships, shatter illusions, and leave scars that even love might not heal. Lucy, ever the dramatic spirit of Port Charles, had made it her mission to orchestrate the perfect wedding for Drew and Willow. Known for her flair and insistence on making every event memorable, Lucy ensured that the guest list was balanced with allies and estranged family members alike. It was her belief that weddings should be about unity, even if it meant inviting people who had more history than harmony. That choice, as it turned out, would ignite a wildfire no one could contain. The first fissure in the day's carefully polished surface came when Carly spotted Lucas arriving at the ceremony. It had been months since they had spoken in person, months filled with lingering bitterness, unspoken truths, and wounded silence. Carly had once been Lucas's fiercest protector, but time and truth had shifted the ground beneath them. Lucas, still processing the many lies surrounding Wiley's adoption and the manipulations that had shaken his world, came to the wedding carrying a quiet fury masked in civility. He hadn't planned on saying anything to Carly. But Carly, never one to let things lie dormant, approached him near the terrace in her signature way, gritted teeth, defensive posture, heart pounding with unresolved guilt. Their conversation, overheard by no one but witnessed by the sea breeze and stone-faced statues of the Quartermain gardens, escalated quickly. Carly demanded to know why Lucas still held her at arm's length, insisting that her actions were to protect family. Lucas, voice sharp and unwavering, accused her of rewriting the past to suit her conscience. He told her that her choices had fractured trust in ways she couldn't fix with a hug or a forced apology. Carly, eyes stinging with the sting of truth, couldn't respond with anything but a bitter silence. The confrontation left her rattled, isolated on a day when she was supposed to smile. Inside the estate, Michael was struggling with demons of his own. As best man and older brother to the bride, he wore the mask of calm responsibility. But beneath the surface, he was spiraling. The fallout with Willow's father had left him questioning his place in the family, and the pressure of reconciling loyalty to Carly, the mother who had always protected him, and Drew, a man he still wasn't sure he fully trusted, weighed heavily. He excused himself from the reception preparations and wandered into the library, where he found Christina sipping from a silver flask and staring into the fireplace. Michael had always trusted Christina with the thoughts he couldn't voice to anyone else. She, in turn, had always been willing to shoulder the emotional weight no one else saw coming. When he confessed that he wasn't sure Drew and Willow's relationship was built to last, that he suspected something was being left unsaid, Christina didn't flinch. Instead, she asked the question Michael had been avoiding: what if they're both using each other to forget what they lost? It was a sentiment Michael had buried, but hearing it aloud shook him. Their conversation deepened, touching on grief, guilt, and the unbearable pressure of pretending that everything was fine for the sake of appearances. Christina, who had experienced her own transformation and found solace in radical honesty, urged Michael not to ignore his instincts, even if it meant challenging the very foundation of this union. Meanwhile, Ava Jerome stood alone near the piano in the main ballroom, staring at her invitation again. She hadn't planned on attending. Her relationship with Drew was cordial but distant, and her rapport with Willow barely existed. But something had compelled her to come, perhaps a lingering hope for redemption or simply a need to be where the tremors of truth might finally rise. What she hadn't expected was the news that was whispered to her by a late-arriving guest: Esme Prince had been seen in Port Charles again. Ava's blood ran cold. Esme, the girl who had nearly ruined Nicholas's life, who had manipulated Spencer and traumatized Trina, was supposed to be gone for good. Her return, even as a rumor, suggested unfinished business. The timing couldn't have been worse. Ava, still raw from the tangled mess with Nicholas, instinctively looked around the room, wondering if anyone else knew. She saw Laura conversing with Anna near the bar, both looking unsettled. Perhaps they had heard the same whispers. If Esme was back, then chaos wasn't just coming, it had already arrived. As Willow walked down the aisle, the tension was palpable. Her dress, a soft ivory lace number chosen for its simplicity, swayed gently with every step. Her smile was radiant, but her eyes flickered with uncertainty. Drew stood waiting, composed but unreadable. They exchanged vows written by hand, pledging a future that sounded almost too rehearsed. It was beautiful, and yet something felt off, like a play staged to perfection, with actors who weren't sure they believed in the script. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the room erupted in polite applause. But those closest to the situation, Carly with her bruised pride, Lucas with his hollow forgiveness, Michael burdened by doubts, Christina wrestling with secrets, and Ava consumed by the specter of Esme, couldn't shake the feeling that this wedding had been a smokescreen. A way to push forward while everything behind them lay unresolved. Later that evening, after the toasts had been given and the cake half-eaten, Lucy cornered Carly on the patio. The wedding planner, always attuned to the emotional currents of any event, asked Carly if she thought the day had gone well. Carly, voice brittle from the earlier fight, replied with a cryptic, "It depends on who you ask." Lucy, nodding slowly, admitted that sometimes the most beautiful weddings made for the most tragic marriages. She handed Carly an unopened envelope. One that had been returned by the post office, undeliverable, addressed to Esme Prince. Carly stared at it, her hands trembling. She hadn't known Lucy had invited Esme. She hadn't even known she was on the list. Lucy shrugged and walked away, leaving Carly with more questions than answers. As the night wore on, guests began to trickle out, whispering to each other about the odd energy of the day. Ava lingered by the gates, her phone buzzing with a cryptic message that simply read, "We're not finished." Michael sat on the porch, watching the stars in silence, while Christina walked barefoot through the garden, replaying every word they had shared. Lucas left without saying goodbye, and Carly remained on the balcony, watching Drew and Willow twirl through their first dance as husband and wife, two people who may have just sealed their fates under the weight of everyone else's secrets. What began as a celebration ended as a reckoning. The wedding of Drew and Willow would be remembered in Port Charles, not for its beauty, but for what it foreshadowed. Beneath the lace and roses, behind every polite smile, the fractures had grown deeper. And in the shadows beyond the lights, someone was watching. Someone who hadn't been invited, but who planned to return.